Fascinating Frontiers, Episode 47, March 30th, 2026. Hey everyone, welcome back to Fascinating Frontiers. I'm Patrick in Vancouver, and this is Episode 47, bringing you the latest from space and science on this Monday morning. Let's kick things off with something that feels very much like the new normal in spaceflight, another big rideshare launch from California. SpaceX is getting ready to send 119 small satellites into orbit in a single Falcon 9 mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base. These rideshare flights have become incredibly important because they give universities, small companies, government agencies, and research groups a reliable and relatively affordable way to reach space without having to pay for an entire rocket themselves. It's a perfect example of how the launch industry has evolved. What used to be incredibly rare, getting even one small spacecraft to orbit, is now happening with almost clockwork regularity. I always find it exciting to think about all those different teams, some of them probably staying up all night in labs across the country, watching their little satellite finally get its ride to orbit this morning. Speaking of big missions with international crews, NASA leaders are expressing high confidence that the first crewed Artemis flight around the moon is still on track. This is Artemis 2, and it's going to be a genuinely historic moment. It will be the first time human beings have traveled beyond low Earth orbit in more than 50 years, since the last Apollo mission in 1972. The four-person crew brings together an impressive mix of experience and firsts. Reed Wiseman is the mission commander. Victor Glover is joining him. Christina Koch will become the first woman to travel around the moon, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen will be the first person from Canada to reach cislunar space. I've been following Hansen's journey for years, and it's really special to see a Canadian heading this far from Earth. Canada has been a steady partner in human spaceflight since the shuttle era, contributing the Canadarm and then the Canadarm2 on the International Space Station. This feels like the natural next step in that long partnership. The crew has been really thoughtful about how they talk about the mission. They keep emphasizing that this flight isn't just for the usual space crowd. They want to connect with communities across the United States and Canada from all kinds of backgrounds, people who might not normally follow space news. Koch has called it an incredible privilege, but also a huge responsibility, and you can tell the whole team is treating these final weeks with intense focus. Wiseman has said the upcoming flight is basically all he thinks about right now. That focus makes sense when you realize how much is riding on every single decision. And on that note, the hardware carrying this crew has received a very practical but important upgrade. Unlike the Apollo astronauts who had to deal with waste using plastic bags and roll-on cuffs, the Artemis 2 crew will have a proper dedicated bathroom inside the Orion spacecraft. It might sound like a small detail, but when you're spending 10 days in a capsule far from Earth, comfort and hygiene become serious engineering challenges. This upgrade draws on everything we've learned from decades of long-duration flights on the Space Shuttle and the International Station. Engineers have been paying close attention to every human factor that affects crew well-being, because when you're in deep space, you can't just come home early if something isn't working. A functional toilet might not make the headlines, but it speaks volumes about how seriously the team is treating the human side of these missions. It's the kind of quiet progress that makes me optimistic about longer journeys we'll attempt in the future. While we prepare to send humans farther from Earth than we've gone in half a century, NASA is also picking up the pace with its robotic lunar program. The agency is increasing the number of uncrewed lander missions heading to the moon in the coming years. This shots-on-goal approach means accepting that not every mission will be perfect, but learning from each one as quickly as possible. Every successful landing gives us better data about the lunar surface, how different regions behave, and what challenges await future crews. Each flight also helps refine landing technologies, hazard avoidance systems, and the basic operations we'll need when people return to the surface. I really like this strategy because it shows NASA treating lunar exploration with the seriousness it deserves, building real experience and reducing risk before we put astronauts back on the moon. The tempo of lunar activity is clearly picking up, and it feels like we're shifting from occasional missions to something that's starting to look like a sustained program. Of course, while we're busy planning trips to the moon, the sun keeps reminding us that it can still throw some serious curveballs. NASA and NOAA are actively monitoring our star for outbursts that could expose astronauts to high radiation during lunar missions. Solar storms remain one of the most unpredictable hazards in cislunar space. The good news is that early warning systems could give crews enough time to seek shelter inside the more shielded parts of their spacecraft. Even a few hours of notice can make a meaningful difference for safety. The monitoring effort pulls data from multiple observatories to try to provide as much advance warning as possible. This whole topic of space weather got me thinking about the solar wind itself. And I have to share something that still blows my mind every time I read about it. If you could somehow shrink the entire solar system so the sun was the size of a grapefruit, the solar wind would still be racing past Earth at speeds of up to 800 kilometers per second, fast enough to circle our planet in under a minute. Here's what's actually happening. The sun's superheated corona is constantly boiling off charged particles. These particles want to fly outward in straight lines, but the sun's rotation and magnetic field twist them into this giant spiraling plasma garden hose that fills the solar system. As this wind expands outward, it carries waves, basically vibrations in the plasma, that act like invisible brokers constantly shuffling energy from faster particles to slower ones. The European Space Agency's solar orbiter has now given us our closest look yet at these waves right near the sun. What's wild is that these waves can heat the plasma to temperatures of 1,000,000 degrees Celsius, even while the visible surface of the sun sits at only about 5,500 degrees Celsius. That temperature inversion still feels almost like magic to physicists. The really puzzling part is that we can now watch the energy transfer happening in exquisite detail, yet we still don't completely understand exactly which wave modes dominate the process or why the heating seems to happen in such sharp bursts. We see the results every time the aurora dances across our sky or a comet's tail streams away from the sun, but the precise choreography inside the solar wind remains one of the sun's best-kept secrets. It's a beautiful reminder that even with all our advanced spacecraft, our own star still holds plenty of mysteries. From trying to understand the plasma around our sun, let's turn to a powerful new tool that will help us study the atmospheres of planets around other stars. At Carnegie Science's Las Campanas Observatory in Chile, astronomers are installing the Henrietta spectrograph on the SWOPE telescope. This instrument is going to be used to examine the atmospheres of rocky exoplanets in much greater detail than we've been able to manage before. Instead of relying on fuzzy direct images, researchers will use high-resolution spectroscopy to carefully dissect the starlight that filters through these alien atmospheres during transits. The technique has already shown us water vapor, sodium, and various carbon-bearing molecules on distant worlds. Henrietta should sharpen that view dramatically, especially for smaller rocky planets that have been harder to study. What we learn about their atmospheric chemistry will tell us whether these worlds experienced similar formation pathways to Earth or took completely different routes. The data could also give us hints about whether any of these atmospheres contain the right mix of gases to support surface liquid water. It's the kind of steady, careful work that doesn't always make big headlines, but quietly moves our understanding forward. I'm always struck by the fact that we're learning detailed chemistry about planets we'll probably never visit in person. What surprises you most about how we study these distant worlds? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Staying with new technology and access to space, that big rideshare launch I mentioned earlier is part of a much larger trend. This will be the 21st mission in SpaceX's smallsat rideshare program. The steady cadence of these flights is changing what smaller teams can realistically accomplish. Instead of waiting years for a launch opportunity, researchers and companies can now plan with much more confidence. That reliable access is opening doors for all sorts of interesting projects that simply wouldn't have happened a decade ago. Meanwhile, the broader Earth observation satellite industry is still working through some growing pains. Industry executives say that missing incentives and technical standards are slowing down the ability of different imaging satellites to queue one another effectively. If we could get better tipping and queuing across vendors, we could respond to events on the ground much more quickly. Right now, technical differences between satellites from various companies create real barriers. Finding ways to make these systems talk to each other smoothly remains an important challenge. When we eventually solve it, an integrated network could transform how we monitor everything from natural disasters to environmental changes and deforestation. It's one of those infrastructure problems that doesn't sound glamorous but could have enormous real-world impact. Shifting from Earth observation to some of the universe's most reliable beacons, astronomers have just learned something surprising about pulsars. A study looking at nearly 200 fast-spinning pulsars shows that they broadcast their radio beams from two different regions, not just near their magnetic poles, but also from the outer edge of their magnetospheres. This challenges long-held assumptions about exactly where these lighthouse-like signals are generated. Pulsars have been studied for decades, yet they still hold surprises. Understanding exactly how these beams form helps us better model the incredibly powerful magnetic fields inside neutron stars. The more we understand about pulsars, the better we can use them as precise cosmic tools, everything from testing general relativity to potentially navigating future deep space missions. Before we wrap up, let's take a quick moment to remember some history. On this day in 1807, the German astronomer Heinrich Olbers spotted the asteroid that would later be visited by NASA's Dawn spacecraft, that's Vesta. His discovery helped confirm that the objects between Mars and Jupiter form a distinct population rather than being simply fragments of a single missing planet. Vesta turned out to be a fascinating world in its own right, showing evidence of ancient volcanic activity. The Dawn mission gave us our first close-up look at this rocky body, and it was full of surprises. Moments like this remind me how long we've been slowly piecing together the story of our solar system, one careful observation at a time. Keep an eye on the Artemis 2 countdown this week as final preparations continue. It's going to be an exciting few months that covers today's space and science news. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a fellow space enthusiast. It really helps the show grow. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.
Drifting softly through the black, a million stars